Then we just say Q and I'll start.
Q.
Hello, good afternoon, namaskar, or should I say ni hao? Considering the scenario, China has been the talk of the town for quite a while now. And no, this is not because of COVID. This has recently emerged after India-China standoff at the LAC. And this was followed by boycott China campaign across India by amateurs or professionals. We are yet to find that out. But we at Business World have always focused on solutions rather than highlighting only problems. So today we should discuss the beastie dragon called China, how India's economy is related with China, how much are we dependent on China, how can we steadily reduce that, what can we do to amplify the situation, to correct the situation, and how to deal with this crisis subtly. We have the best panel who can guide us here. I would request my editorial colleague, Madhumita Chakravarti, to please go ahead and introduce our panelists. Madhumita ji, over to you.
Welcome all. We have the topic of the day is empowering China, the next world in charge. We have on the panel today, we have Mr. Prabal Basu, Law and Fellow from the London Business School. He's also member, Board of Directors, Intellect Payments Limited. He's advisor to Chairman of Corporate Boards. We have Dr. Sandeep Goyal, Chairman, Moge Media. Pardon me, Dr. Goyal, if I hope I've pronounced
That's okay, Madhumita
right.
ji, please. Yes.
Okay, Dr. Amit Kapoor, Chairman, India Council on Competitiveness. He's also editor-in-chief of a magazine. We have Dr. Vikas Singh, founder, Crux Management. We have Dr. Bhuvan Lal, Executive Chairman, Lal Brothers Entertainment. Dr. Batra has not been able to join us yet.
I joined.
Okay, Dr. Batra, welcome. So,
hello, Dr. Batra, I was missing you.
Mr. Prabal Basu, you are the only one who doesn't have a PhD. You don't have passion, you don't have hunger, you don't have desire. You made so much money already. And, but you definitely have a permanent head damage. One of the common things, Madhumita and Abhinav, about all the panelists is most of them are all of them are BW columnists. Some of them more write regularly, some of them write infrequently, but all of you contribute, and we know that you have a sharp point of view and you're not afraid to say what you have to say. So I'm here more as a student and listener and observer rather than contributing. So Abhinav, it's all yours.
Sure, Dr. Batra, we're all students of life. I mean, that goes without saying.
You haven't got married, so you won't know about life, but that's another.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you that. Okay. So opening question, and this will be my brief question, and I would request all the panelists to start this panel discussion with one number in their mind. Prabal Basu, my opening question is to you, and of course, this question is passed on to all the panelists. In an ideal scenario, if India acts with all its energy and have everything in place, be it policies, be it government decisions, be it tax terrorism evaded, be it labor laws addressed, be it export issues addressed, how long do you think we can match China? The number of years which come to your mind in an idealistic scenario.
That's a speculative question, Abhinav.
That's true, and that's the reason I'm asking you.
And unlike you, we're at the end of our career, end of our lifespan, and I've been waiting for that day for the last 40 years.
Last 40 years.
Yes, last 40 years. Since Deng Xiaoping started the 1979 reforms in China, when both China and India were on the same plane. And so, I won't give you an answer to that because there's too many things involved which I don't think are happening.
Sure, but given an ideal scenario, which number will you choose? 20 years, 30 years?
About 20 years, yes.
About 20 years.
20 years.
Sure. Dr. Sandeep Goyal, do you have any number in mind in an idealistic scenario? When can we reach the level of China, be it policies? Dr. Sandeep,
The
can you hear me?
honest answer is I don't think in my lifetime it is going to happen.
So there goes.
Whether that is 20 years, 30 years or more,
Right.
I don't think in the near foreseeable future we have any chance of catching up with China.
So
None at
that's
all.
absolutely.
Sure. Dr. Vikas, in an idealistic scenario, if India has everything in place, how many years do you give India to reach China's level?
Unfortunately, we don't live in an idealist world, Abhinav.
And that's
So
why I mentioned idealistic. And that's why I mentioned.
So we are ahead of China in several things. As far as the economy is concerned, it's going to take at least another 30 years before we are anywhere near China. But having said that, I think I would be better. We are better off in many other areas. Economy is a laggard, but we are working towards it.
Sure. Last but not the least, Dr. Bhuvan Lal. How many years?
I actually don't agree with some of the other speakers.
Okay.
I'm far more optimistic. I think end of the decade, mark my words, we will be not only ahead of China, we will be emerging as a world power.
Sure. I like the optimism. Amit, Dr. Amit, can you hear me?
Dr. Kapoor?
Dr. Kapoor, one number in your mind? In an idealistic scenario?
Sorry, Dada. So, Abhinav, I would like to respond to it. I can say with certainty that in 2040, and I'm writing an article in this issue of why I believe in 20 years we could be at the same level as China, with China also trying to up its game in the next 20 years. Could be ahead of China. That's my view.
I think we are far ahead of China. We allow our citizens to vote. We're already far ahead. And any civilization that allows its citizens to vote, freely discuss any issue on earth, does not need to worry about whatever else everybody else is doing. Civilizations that don't allow themselves to vote, don't have democracy, are dying. See that very up in the next few years.
Sure. So
our civilization is so strong, our constitution is so strong. Democracy and demographics is in our favor.
Sure. Now, if I take a mean average, it will be roughly around 10 to 20 years if I take the mean average of all the panelists. Prabal Da, we set the tone for the discussion. Now, my first question to you would be, and of course, we'll follow it through the rest of the panelists. How dependent are we on China as of now, according to you? And why are we so dependent on China wherever we are? And how can we improvise that? When it comes to trade, when it comes to imports and exports, what's your opinion on India's dependence on China as of now? Prabal Da?
Abhinav,
yes.
Let me try and answer it by decluttering a couple of things which are in the public domain. And then we'll get into it. There are a lot of parallel narratives going on in the public domain today with respect to China. So one is the US trade war, which has an implication. The second is the post-COVID scenario. That has an implication. And of course, the border issues with respect to India. So we need to declutter this because these are parallel narratives going and it confuses the entire picture. It's obviously a complex thing. So let me set the border issues right first. Economic sanctions, which a lot of people are calling for in various words, official, unofficial, boycott goods, etc., etc. So they're a legitimate tool of defense or aggression in any war. The question is, though, are we in a war with China? Or is it just a pinprick for getting some diplomatic advantage? That is one. Second is, can economic sanctions at all be imposed by an economically weaker nation? And third is, the trade imbalance is so large with respect to China that it will simply not work. So these are the three things to get this border issues part out of the picture. So that leaves us with the real question, which is the question to your answer, essentially, is given the US trade war on one hand and the COVID-related isolationist tendencies of many countries on the other hand, does India have a play in this emerging scenario or not? That is the key question. And second is how to reduce our dependence on China because of that. These are the two essential questions which I think at a macro policy level we need to understand. And the answer to both is only one, which many industry leaders have said. I fully agree with that, which is that increasing, let's say, competitiveness of the Indian industry in the marketplace is the only sustainable route rather than ill thought out embargoes and things of that nature. So we have to increase our competitiveness in the Indian industry. That is the only thing which will take us up to China, reduce our dependence on China, make us play in the world market, etc., etc. And that's a big topic, and we can get into that. We can get into that after the other panelists are done. How do we increase the competitiveness of Indian industry?
Abhinav, at this point,
Therefore beat China, and therefore beat China, therefore do all the other good things we talked about.
I think Prabal Basu made the right points, asked the right questions, that are we at war with China, or it is just a tactical distraction? Can a economically weaker nation actually impose sanctions on a economically stronger nation? Dr. Amit Kapoor has also joined. You can ask your question to Dr. Amit Kapoor. Dr. Amit Kapoor, Abhinav Trivedi asked this question, that all things being equal, India getting everything right, when do you think we can be at par with China, or you believe we can never be at par with China or ahead of China? Dr. Amit Kapoor?
Yeah, Anurag, this is a very interesting question. It is a fully loaded question, and it presumes that China will stop growing. In fact, from a mathematical viewpoint, I don't think India is crossing China if China continues to grow at about 5% or 6%. India will have to continue to grow at about 15% to do that. And
Absolutely.
I did hear remarks of Dr. Bhuvanlal. I think that's an interesting point, that yes, India is far ahead in terms of democracy and everything. Yes, but we are talking about an economic view here. I don't think we can disagree with Bhuvan in terms of saying that yes, India is a great democratic nation, but from an economic viewpoint, India will take a lot of time to really catch up. Just looking at numbers, the world economy, 10% of the world economy GDP is contributed by China, 3% by India. We are a very long way off. And that is where it is. If everything stays still, China stays still, then we are talking about 50 years.
I'd like to respond to that.
Sure. Please go ahead, Mr. Lal.
Okay, we are a $3 trillion economy. We are nothing right now, but things change. The COVID-19 situation is that turning point. Globally, this has impacted the image of China in a way that it had never done before. The current situation at Galwan is also a turning point. The 1,100 kilometer a mile fence that we have along the India, Tibet, and China border right now is going to transform Indian economy. I'll tell you why. We are at a stage where our entire policy, economic policy, our defense policy, our diplomatic policy with China is going to be reviewed. And not only we, China's biggest markets, two of the biggest people who give them orders every day, India and United States, they are reviewing it too. So the world is going to review, EU is going to review it. China does not have the same diplomatic moves now that it had just 3, 5, 6 months ago. The world will favor a democratic India in comparison to a communist country, a communist party run country. We have our future waiting for us. We have excellent service economy. We just have to transform it into a manufacturing economy. Of course, it will take time. It will take decades to do that, but we are in the right direction. So basically, I think COVID-19 and its warmongering along its borders with its neighbors is going to affect China's image and economic policies in the future.
And if I may add to Bhuvan, for the first time, Indian consumer would possibly be averse to buying Chinese products and buying Indian or other products, if I may say. At least some part of the Indian consumers, as of now, today's sentiment. So that, let's see how long it continues, and can India build a competitive advantage? Because boycott should happen on merit. It shouldn't happen just on sentiment. While we all are nationalists, we love India and we'd like to grow India and the Indian capability. But we'll see how long this sentiment continues, and does it become mainstream and big enough for it to impact the economy of China. At this point, let's get other people in. Dr.
Anurag, on that point about Indian consumers wanting to boycott or not to buy products, we ran a survey only last week, and you'd be surprised to know that only 21% consumers said they would, delete their TikTok app. I mean, a good 80% of them would rather keep their TikTok app than succumb to the, conversations about anti-China. Same thing with mobile phones. I mean, about nothing more than 30-35% actually one knew that most of the phones that they are using are Chinese. And after being told that the phone they have in hand is a Chinese, the key question was not about whether I will buy it or not. He said, "Where's the option?" So you see, one is I don't know it is a Chinese product, and two, even if I know it is a Chinese product, I have no other substitute to go after. So all this sentiment, I think one is largely either media or it is social media. It does not kind of convert into the same kind of groundswell at the consumer level. So you know, a lot of this is really intellectual discussion. I don't think very many consumers are going to forsake Chinese products because in many categories there is really no substitute available.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Thank you for making such an important point and a current point of view. Your survey is absolutely, contextual to what we are discussing in its recent. Dr. Vikas Singh?
Yeah, I just want to ask, let's go back a little bit. I'd like to start by asking two questions. Can we, and that's an important, can we boycott Chinese product? But I think the more important question is, should we do it? You know, the history tells us, and I've gone through the history of last 70, 80 years, many economies tried banning products from different economies. For example, 70, 80 years back, China itself banned every product from Japan because Japan was ruling over them. It failed miserably. The US did that in 2003 when they said they boycotted all products from France. It failed badly. Also, somewhere in the mid 80s, the Soviet Union that time said that they will boycott all agricultural products from Europe. And you know, the common theme of all these three examples are that all the three times it failed miserably. I, I think most of us don't realize that we are not as decoupled as we think. In every product that we buy, in every product that we use, there is an element of foreign material. You may say that the phones are made from China. Maybe we buy some phones which are not made in China. For example, the iPhone that I'm talking from. But there is some element of iPhone from China. So it's practically impossible in today's economy or in today's age to ban one country or one economy from your life. The other point that I wanted to show that answers the question, can we? We cannot. The other thing that we need to really understand, should we do it or not? Now, we've been talking about Make in India for the last 15, 20 years, and the Prime Minister has been very, very aggressive, and he's made the right noise. He's also made the right effort. Something has happened, but you know, for us to be a competitor or be self-sufficient in Make in India is going to take some doing. You know, our labor laws are, at best pathetic. The cost of capital is high. Somebody, a friend of mine who heads a steel company, was telling me, because you'll be surprised to know the interest that we pay. Interest in the fixed cost of making steel in India is the same cost that China is supplying steel at. Now, when you look at these examples, you realize that you are really way off the curve. It's practically not possible to do that. It will require some doing. My only, if for those who are hearing this, my only request is that this is not the time to look at boycotting things. If we boycott China, it's like cutting our nose to spite our face. It's not going to work. The government should take a decision if it wants to boycott. And I heard a couple of senior bureaucrats and ministers talking about it. If it needs to do it, we need to plan it well. We need to implement it better. We need to make sure that, okay, in the next 10 years, we are going to be Atmanirbhar. We are going to make sure that we are able to produce things that's going to help the economy, and that will eliminate our over-dependence on China or any other economy. We haven't seen that. So let's wait until that happens. I hope that the government makes a sincere effort, a serious effort to make sure that we push towards making products cheaper, making products better, and making products in a manner where the world accepts it. So that's my two bit to start with.
You know, I'm so
Dr. Vikas Singh is saying that instead of, तो हिंदी में कहावत है कि लकीर मिटाने से अच्छा है कि आप एक बड़ी लकीर खींचते. What he's saying, we have to develop our own capability. If you heard R.C. Bhargav, in the last 2 weeks. If you heard Rajiv Bajaj, they said that if we stop the imports from China of the components that go into our automobiles, the automobiles will be costlier. It will impact the Indian consumer. It will impact the Indian manufacturer. And they feel that it is impractical over the next few years, not perennially, to be able to do that. So how does India build that longer line? वो बड़ी लकीर कैसे खींचे हिंदुस्तान? How does India develop its capabilities?
And Anurag, I have just a small point to make on what Dr. Vikas Singh said. You know, this concept of banning from other countries, you know, either products or services. Actually, China is the big champion of banning everybody else. So there is no Google, there is no Facebook, there is no Twitter in their country. What have they built? Instead, they've built a massive WeChat, they've built Sina Weibo, they've built QQ, they've built IQI, they've built Baidu, they've built Douban. And each of these apps are in fact bigger, more powerful, and far, far more impactful than the products that we have from Silicon Valley. So they are the first champions, in fact, in terms of keeping the rest of the world out. It's not that I'm saying that's the right strategy, but I'm basically saying that China has built its economy by first creating a walled garden of its own, keeping out Western competition, strengthening their own products, and now they're taking their own products and taking them into economies like ours, which is how that whole discussion about TikTok actually came about.
Exactly.
So, and dare I say,
and I'm glad
that China started doing this in the early 60s. What you see in China started in the 60s. It didn't.
Yeah, except that Africa domination digital initiative is all of 15 years old. This digital initiative of keeping out, the Western brands and building their own and building them to the kind of muscle which is unimaginable is actually an initiative of just the last 10 or 12 years. So it's not going back very far back or whatever. TikTok, in fact, is all of a 3 or a 4-year-old product.
What I'm saying, this whole philosophy of building muscle and this strategy of building economic enterprise goes back to the early 60s. They started this, they built a game plan in the 60s to be able to accomplish what they have.
Led by
not
Mao Zedong.
of technology, but manufacturing economy. Even in Africa, Dr. Goel, they started going to African countries and started investing in them 20 years back.
Yes.
20 years back.
You're right.
The global thinkers.
Though they think very long term. So
they are not investing. They are giving loans, and they are making countries captive of those loans. Let's get real. Let's get real. These are all political things. Just to come back to the telecom.
Can you separate politics and economy? Can you separate politics and economy in today's world?
Just a sec, Anurag. I wanted to comment on the telephone thing. We can't ban telephones and cell phones from being bought from, but we can certainly make sure India's data stays within Indian territory, and we can also make sure that the backbone being utilized by our service providers is not China dependent at all, because there are security implications to that. Those are two things that the government policy should ensure.
But I was glad Mr. Sanjeev mentioned that point about land and labor laws before. The point is that China has a control of 70% of the supply chain all over the world, and some panelists rightly said that because they have invested in their own walled gardens. So let's come to our own walled garden, and I'll start from Prabal. Prabal, land and labor laws have been a big concern for us. I mean, we have got 200 legislations in the labor laws. We have got inflexible labor laws. People cannot fire employees. We have more than 80% of the workforce working on non-contractual labor. How do we enhance our labor laws? And where are we lagging?
Well, Abhinav, I'll answer this point question. But at some point in the discussion, I think we should go back to some of the larger issues, because otherwise we'll get caught into these smaller things. But let me answer this labor law thing first. Since you asked me directly.
This is not a smaller thing. I mean, most of the companies raise this as a pain point while investing in India.
No, I don't mean that. What I meant was that it will be a great learning for serious China watchers to actually figure out how did China come from 79 to today? What are the things they did and what are the things we are not doing? It will be a great thing, but I'm parking that aside for the moment. So let me just take this labor law. It's a big issue, of course, but within the context of specific policies. So let's take labor laws. So we've had labor laws till today, which are no hire, no fire, archaic laws, restrictive, etc., etc. Even when I was in Indonesia, maybe 25 years ago, they had more liberal labor laws where there was a human way of firing people, right? So essentially what is needed in the labor laws in India is the flexibility to adjust the labor inputs based on the production changes. That is what is needed. However, what have we done now in the last couple of months? We have thrown the baby out of the bathwater. We have just dumped entire thing totally. And today we have in some states, I'm talking about some states who have done that, we have, even taken away labor rights of work timings for that matter, of working conditions. We have thrown everything out.
You're asking what happened in UP, like what Yogi Adityanath did.
Yes, in UP, for example. Yes, correct. So this is just a short-term thing. What is required is a long-term, deeply thoughtful process, because the basis of labor laws in India has always been an adversarial labor and management,
Right.
because of communist hangover, right? That is the basis. That basis has to be broken. Labor laws in terms of policy framework, in terms of legal frameworks and structure of the labor and management relationship, attitude of unions. This has to understand that the adversarial relationship will not work. And if the company remains viable, the company is competitive, and the company grows, these three things, that is the only way to protect a worker's career, quality of life, and higher wages. So it's a two-way street. So unless this nexus is broken, and at a policy framework level, we will never do. So the point is, we are not putting in enough thought. We're just doing this off the cuff. COVID came, so let's just throw out the labor laws too. That is not going to work. So
Dr. Vikas, sure.
Abhinav,
Dr.
I
Vikas?
come in with a question here. I think it follows from what Mr. Boshuroy said, that I don't think we should really compare India and China in terms of labor laws.
Correct.
The amendment to the act is temporary. It is an emergency measure taken for COVID, for the COVID-driven times, and India can never really, duplicate Chinese laws in India simply because our political systems are different, and no government that brings in the kind of legal system that China has will ever survive in our country. So I don't think that's a very clever way to drive an argument. So because our political systems are so very different, I mean, we can't possibly duplicate Chinese legal systems or Chinese strategies in India. That is one. The second thing is that when we look at India and China from a long-term perspective, we are doing it from a COVID-driven world where the whole world is at a standstill, and China is impacted to a great extent because of COVID. Nobody is going to import Chinese products now, even if they need it, simply because nobody wants the contamination. So I think when we look at the long term, 10, 15 years, we are actually putting the before the horse, because we should the immediate state of affairs where China is 100% on a back foot, because of the contamination which nobody wants. As we can see voices from the US and the West, there are a lot of concern raised over what it is doing in Hong Kong, what it is doing in Galwan. So in terms of soft power, I think China is tremendously on a back foot at the moment. So I think perhaps let's discuss that, the immediate future. I mean, that is
Sure.
what I was. I don't know what to say, because you have in the previous webinar definitely shown the advantage that China has in terms of the way its economy has grown. But what about the situation pans out now? What about a situation where Donald Trump just doesn't want to have anything to do with anything manufactured in China? What about a situation where Europe doesn't want to import anything from China? I mean, or have any truck with any part of the world from where it anticipates contamination. So uh, let's please debate this, the immediate future, before we go ahead. I mean, I can see Dr. Lal nodding. Perhaps you
Yes.
have something to say.
You see, China has just hit a roadblock in Sweden. They set up Confucius institutes all over the world. They have a very strong soft power plan. And for years, I've been observing in the entertainment industry how they tried to invade Hollywood, how they tried to invest in companies that were really big, making movies, and the cinema industry. In fact, AMC Cinemas in America, the single largest chain, was owned by a Chinese company. So all these companies were coming into the space of cultural programming and soft power. India, other than Hollywood, is the single largest content production enterprise on planet Earth. Our stars are bigger than Hollywood stars. Hollywood stars are not at all recognized in India in comparison to the Indian stars. Even our regional stars are bigger than them. We have this golden opportunity to use our assets, our heritage, our content, and take it global right now. The world wants to see an alternative to Hollywood. The world wants to see an alternative to other programming that is available. And our government should make a very strong pitch, a cultural diplomatic pitch at all levels across the world in our embassies and high commissions to promote Indian content. This is that moment. We will not get this opportunity again. Ultimately, the British rule, which was the biggest empire on planet Earth, it didn't rule because of the military. It ruled our minds. The fact that we are having this conversation in English is a symbol of that. It still rules our minds. Please understand the power of soft power and the capability of Indian content industry in this space. We should unleash it immediately.
Sure. Dr. Vikas, do you believe the land and labor laws, the context which we spoke of earlier, and of course what Madhumita ji said, do you think we are addressing our challenges within our own walled gardens to compete with China?
It's not only land and labor. I mean, when you look at and I'm particularly talking about the MSME
land and labor
sector.
is one side of the spectrum because you come from MSMEs. That's why
I'm talking about the MSME issue. So land and labor are, of course, very difficult to ride over for the MSME sector. There are other challenges as well. For example, where is the skill?
Sure.
When you want to make in India, you need to get scale. You need to get the skills. You need to get loan at 2%. Today's MSME pays at 12%, or any corporate sector pays. And I don't want to really bash government bashing. I would also like to talk about the corporates, the large corporates. And it was heartening to see Rahul Bajaj and the Maruti Udyog chairman talking about. So the auto industry has done tremendous work in supporting the MSME sector. But if you really look at the other industry, the other sectors, I think there's hardly been any support from the large corporates to make the MSMEs competitive in any economy, in any developed economy. And I think this may surprise most people. The pyramid of the economic structure is like a pyramid. In India, there's no pyramid at all. They're close to about 6 crore MSMEs, dominated by the 100 top or 500 top corporates. So there's the missing middle. Now, what the missing middle really does is it provides a support to the large corporates to make them competitive. But because the MSMEs don't exist, the middle doesn't exist, even the large corporates are not competitive. So what I'm trying to say is the government needs to really look at this whole thing in a very, very holistic manner. All we have heard from the government, and it's not only this government, it's the other governments as well, including the state governments, let's tinker this, let's do this, let's fix this. That doesn't work. If you have to take on the might of China, you can't be fixing and tinkering. You need to make a plan. You need to live with that plan. Another thing that I'd like to talk about when we say that we should make things in India, we should be Atmanirbhar. Now, there are few things that we must make, but we don't need to make everything. The competitive advantage of an economy is not to make everything, to make things that make sense for us, to make things that we are competitive. Imagine if we start making everything, a lot of our resources will get diverted to that, hindering the whole economy. We must realize what we are good at, focus on making that, but making that well, making that the best so that we can gain the competitive advantage. Unless we are able to do that, this debate is very sentimental. This debate is very romantic. It doesn't do anything for the people who are 30% of Indians are still deprived. We need to make sure that we are able to give them two meals a day. This kind of let's ban this, let's ban that is not going to help anybody. I'm sorry to say
Exactly.
that.
Exactly. Dr. Amit Kapoor, I mean, I would like to extend what Dr. Vikas said. It takes 64 months in India to file a patent, while in China it takes only 22. And that's why China is at the top of the list when it comes to filing global patents. Do you think we are addressing our internal challenges while we are also competing with the other powers?
So I think it's the number of days it takes to file patents is just one of the indicators from an innovation perspective. The question is, what is the innovation ecosystem that the country actually has? What is it that we're trying to do on the innovation ecosystem?
Right.
What is it? In fact, if you really look at it, like what Prabal said in the beginning was that how do we really understand the competitiveness of the nation? If you really talk about competitiveness of, say, an IT industry, I think I don't really see, and in my whole humble opinion, I don't see that Indian IT industry is very competitive. It is actually at the lower end of the food chain. We have actually been oblivious to the very idea of creating products and so on and so forth. And that's a true thing that we have not seen across the board. If you really look at it, and I think there are two things to this whole innovation perspective as well. It becomes very easy for us to bash the government, but in the Indian context, it's the corporate world which has not done favors in terms of creating innovation capacity or capability. If you really look at the R&D spends, 60% of the Indian R&D spend comes from the government and 40% is from the corporate world. So that means there is a severe lacuna. If you really talk about Israel, 95% of the R&D spends actually happens from the corporate world. So we need to focus that. People need to realize that R&D is going to be driving things. It can actually be the basis for competitive advantage. And this is exactly what is not happening in the country. So if you really look at it, what we are really debating is that how can India become an innovation driven economy? If India wants to be an innovation driven economy, we'll have to strengthen our institutions in terms of, say, educational institutions. And this is my pet peeve here. I do not know if Anurag will agree with this or not, but I think most of the educational institutions in India have effectively got relegated to placement agencies.
Absolutely.
Create them as entrepreneurial hubs. Why do you actually want to really create a situation that we are going to be seeking jobs? So that is where it is. So we need to change that. The fundamental mindset needs to change for people. Each one of us has to understand what is the contribution that we are making and how we are going to be more productive. And that's what enterprises can do. And that is what can actually happen across the board. In fact, what Bhuvan was saying is so important. In fact, what Bhuvan said was that what the cultural thing is, like if you really push the cultural milieu or whatever, I would actually say that there are three pillars to this whole part of the excellent story: technology, tolerance, and talent. So when I say this is that whole creative economy bit that we have to really understand. Like, so how is it that we are able to harness a creative economy? What is it that we do with people across the board? That's a question that we need to answer. But last point that I would like to say as this question is, we need to understand very clearly that we need to focus on industries where we can do well. In the Indian context, what I think is everybody wants to do everything under the sun. No, you look at each of the states and find out what is it that my advantages are, and we focus on those 3 or 4 sectors. You can't do everything under the sun in every of those states. Every state wants to be an IT hub. It's like this, like, will Chandigarh be an IT hub? It can never be an IT hub because it does not have the conditions to be an IT hub. It's a very simple competitive advantage view. But then why is it that you were able to create an IT hub in Bangalore, Chennai, or whatever? Because of the large set of educated population that existed there. So you have to understand the antecedents and then actually go forward in terms of understanding what India needs to do. And one last thing, in fact, if you really talk from a China perspective, I don't think we need to say that we can actually shun the China product. It just simply cannot happen. The world is too very well integrated. The supply chains are so well entrenched. The question is going to be that how is it that we are able to make ourselves competitive in the things that we are doing, rather than saying just do away with China. We should say we should make ourselves competitive. How is it that we are able to create the right product at the right price and given the right quality is what we need to focus on. Sorry, Anurag, you were saying.
I just want to make a philosophical point that we keep saying that we are reacting. This is an emotional reaction. Of course, if our soldiers die, we all feel strongly about it. And, you know, any sensitive and conscious citizen feels very emotionally about it, and that's the right thing. But at the same time, you know, whatever the Prime Minister is doing or the country is doing or the government is doing. We're not saying that the seeds of it will come tomorrow or day after. We're actually seeding a thought. Even when the Prime Minister gets up on stage and says, it's okay to be an entrepreneur when he does Startup India, he's changing the mindset of the parents and the culture. It may not be visible in the next 1 decade. It may happen over 2 decades. Similarly, this discussion may not immediately results what the way government is changing its direction or becoming nuanced towards China, it may. But over a period of time, maybe some of the capabilities that we want to develop may get developed as a response. It shouldn't have taken a Galvan for us to become Atmanirbhar or move into that direction. But, maybe that's the tipping point. Let me say that. There are about 12 questions already in the Q&A chat, and about 19 in the, so 31 questions. At a short notice, we've got a decent audience. It tells you the interest in this. And we at Business World, over the next 1 week, will only focus on Indo-China, in our webinars. And, we're doing a special issue on the economic and business ties between India. We have to look at it. Can it be changed over a period of time? Can India develop its muscle in terms of economy? And one question which is not just related to, I would like all the participants to answer is this thing about India printing more currency, not worrying about credit ratings, because it has a direct impact on creating demand, which can then get the Indian economy up. So I would like a response at the end. Abhinav, over to you.
But it also has inflation on the other side. So yeah, we'll ask Prabal Basu to start this discussion again. Will it be wise to what Dr. Batwa said?
So this is a topic I've written about, and it's a complex topic. You can't handle it in such a small window which you're giving us. You just can't handle it. But let me just give you the overall synopsis of however much I can simplify it. Printing currency is done by the US because of its status as the global reserve currency. That has various implications, but essentially in a very layman's term, it means they can spend without the currency weakening. Why it happens and all I can talk about later some other place or read up my writings. But this is the issue. So therefore, countries like us, Venezuela, Brazil, or any of the other countries cannot print indefinitely. Okay, so this is the first thing. And the second thing is because they are printing their way out and not paying the costs of that today, who is going to pay those costs? That is the main question of this proliferation which is happening. So whereas for US, the costs will be paid much, much later in terms of an asset boom bust cycle. That is how they'll pay it. People like us and the emerging economies, Venezuela has already done it, Brazil has done it, Argentina has done it once, will pay through either high inflation or through a weakening currency. That is much more immediate than the 20 years, 30 years when the asset cycle will bust for the US. So therefore, let's not get romantic about this. I think the government has done, and I've complimented the government openly in a standard article saying they have not fallen to this trap, and I think it's a very good thing they have done. But of course, there are other implications also which I've written there, etc. But this is the main thing. On printing currency, to my knowledge, and I think Raghuram Rajan believes in this as well. He has said that as well. It is not the right route for India to go, given our status at the moment.
Sure. Dr. Amit?
Not at all. Not at all. I agree with Prabal. Like, you cannot simply get into a situation where you say that we are going to print currency, because it can have huge detrimental inflationary effects that we cannot actually handle over a period of time. I think the story has to be that how do we become more competitive? How do we become more productive over a period of time? I think if you really look at it, there's a very clear-cut association between your currency's value and productivity. So India needs to strengthen its rupee, it needs to strengthen its productivity, and then move on. Yeah. And I think that is where India is actually going to become competitive. That's the task that is at hand, and that's what the government should focus on.
On that note, let me ask you, Dr. Amit, what should we do to improvise our vocational education and, improvising a next generation in new skill set building?
Oh, I think if you really ask me, like, in terms of, like, that's a very, very large question in terms of what India needs to do in terms of from an educational point of view. I think we will have to really start from our universities to improving the
Correct.
quality, or rather, I think it should start from the school system itself, like the vocational
Research.
training will need to happen at the school level. That is where we need to instill the spirit that you learn some skill set and then actually move forward. There is so much that needs to be done there. Each district should actually have a vocational training center. But then that is actually going to be a very important question, is what is it that we are able to do with the vocational people? India has a large labor force. The question is going to be, how is it that we are able to engage with them? What are the right opportunities? What is it that they need to focus on? So it is an important question again, but then the larger thing is going to be, what is it that certain district is going to be focusing on? If I know what they are going to focus on, that's the vocational training we need to build, and then we move forward. So find the competitive advantage, or what is the basis for competitiveness for each district in the country, and drive it. Very interestingly, government of Uttar Pradesh has done it. They call it as one OROP, I think, one product, one district.
You're saying we should customize our approach.
Absolutely. It will have to be customized. When you talk about competitive federalism, it is going to be competitive district federalism kind of a thing. That's going to be the way forward for the country.
Dr. Sandeep Goyal, do you agree with what Amit said?
Yeah, I think Amit made a very valid point. I mean, you cannot have competitive advantage in everything that you do.
Exactly.
There are some certain things that you will be good at and certain things you will not be good at. Also, the point is that I think all industries are constantly evolving. I mean, I've come from an advertising business, and one of the key questions that I keep answering for a lot of my colleagues in the industry is that 30 years ago we needed copywriters. Today, the advertising industry requires coders. I mean, the requirement of the kind of talent base that you require keeps changing. No, I can smile about it, but you see, you look at the restaurant business. I mean, it required waiters. Today, it requires delivery boys. I mean, the kind of people you require at different points of time by the requirements of the industry can change. But I want to go back to an earlier question. We kind of left halfway. I think there are industries where we have done extremely well. I mean, while we might say that 70, 80, maybe 80% of all mobile phones today in this country are Chinese, fact of the matter is that between 70 to 90% of every mobile phone is today locally manufactured. So you see, the mobile industry itself is providing a huge amount of employment and a huge amount of revenue is coming through. So the question is, what are we opposing? Are we opposing the brands, or are we opposing the ownership? See, the brands are Chinese owned, but the Chinese brands are producing in India. So I think that dichotomy, if there is any, needs to be also understood and addressed. I don't think we can have any quarrel with the fact that if the brand is Chinese but is producing 95% or 99% of what it is producing in India with Indian resources, Indian talent, Indian workers in Indian factories, I don't think we can really have a quarrel with that.
Absolutely.
Dr. Sandeep, that will be an unending discussion, because people usually find it confusing what to target and what not to when it comes to sentiment. Amit, Bhuvanlal, Dr. Bhuvan, you have any opinion here?
I completely agree with some of the things said today about competitiveness, about focusing on one specific area. We can't be good at everything. But I must add, the biggest thing that we can offer to this world as an ancient civilization is education. And in the area of education, we have completely lost out to the Western world, to universities globally. Our universities are not into research and innovation. And because of that, we don't feature in the top 200, 300 universities of the world. It's a surprise. A civilization that's a 5,000-year-old civilization plus does not have the answer to Harvards and Oxfords today. Our academicians are ruling the faculties of all the universities around the world. But in India, we have nothing. This has to change. And it has to change at the primary level to the university level. We have to have a research-oriented skill set training program which serves not only our country, but provides a workforce for the rest of the world. We have 1.3 billion people. If the European nations need caregivers, we should export them. We should train people to run taxi cabs around the world. Why not? We are that country that will provide employment to not only our people, but provide services to the world. We should focus on that.
Yeah. I also want to, Dr. Bhuvanlal, and you may not agree, may agree, Dr. Kapoor may agree, may not agree. The reason we don't fare well in the rankings that are done by either World Bank as well as we should or done by any other private government owned it, because the questionnaires are very skewed to the strengths that the Western nations have. I
Maybe.
can prove it
That's
to you
correct.
empirically that
Maybe.
some of the strengths of India are not factored in those questionnaires.
That's very
We
correct.
will
That's
never
very
do
correct.
well, even if we had strength, unless until we change the evaluation. I just want to, Abhinav, you did a video on China and I posted it and I got flack from my colleagues in the company, senior colleagues who wrote, and my friends. I would like that video to be shown a little bit and tell us in brief to our esteemed panelists, what did you say in the video and the thought process behind that, Abhinav?
So we published this video last week, and the essence of the video was that boycott China approach won't work. We need to overpower China or at least match China, and that could be done by working on our own policies. Firstly, of course, land and labor laws, tax terrorism. We need to get that tag out from our background so that we can welcome as much FDI into our country, and so that we become a democratic alternate to China, which the world is expecting from us. Third, of course, we need to invest more on our vocational training, educate our youth in the future technologies when it comes to artificial intelligence, big data, cybersecurity. We need to train our youth there. And last but not the least, we need to plan and think long term. Like we have the youngest population in the world for the next 30 years. After that, we'll lose that advantage and we'll become Japan. So in the next 30 years, we need to think long term and plan it like China did in order to reach at a level where China is today. I mean, boycott China doesn't exist. It's only existing in slogans, and it'll be a very sentimental
And it is
response.
ironic that even now in Trump's rallies, the flags are immediate that say boycott China are manufactured in China. I mean, it may sound ironical, but that's the reality. And Abhinav pointed out right from nails to nail cutters to small things. The ones that we use in our home are made in China because they've worked. They may not be Swiss made and be that quality, but in a value conscious nation, that became a driving factor. I also want to ask all the panelists is, what do you think that the government can do in the this government has another 4 years to go. So we can be sure of those 4 years. What do you think the government can do in the next 4 years to be able to in some way contribute to the journey of being more competitive?
I think the Indian bureaucracy should learn from the Singapore bureaucracy how to allow foreign investors into their country, how to invite Indian entrepreneurs and businessmen to be able to work with global standards. I think we have lost out because of the whole system of holding back our nation and red tapeism. That needs to go out. And the vision of the Prime Minister is there, but doesn't get implemented on the ground, essentially because people don't understand disconnect in the government. They have to learn best state practices in civil services globally, reform the civil service immediately.
Dr. Sandeep Goyal?
I worked very many years with the Japanese, and luckily the Indian Prime Minister has a very, very good equation with Shinzo Abe-san. And I think the Japanese are also very, very supportive of India. So I think we also need to start, as much as we look for enemies, we need to look for friends. And I think in that friends category, Japan could be a very, very high order friend to have. They have the technology. They also have a problem with a very aging population. They have a lot of money, and their money is very, very cheap because, there's a negative rate of interest in their country. They're also very, very fond of India because they've had some very big successes in the Indian market. So if I were to look at a short-term, fix, the bestest thing is to leverage the Modi-Abe relationship and try and woo Japan far more aggressively over the next 3-4 years to bring in investment, to bring in partners, to bring in technology, and to bring in, more important than anything else, a trusted friend.
I totally agree with Mr. Goyal. I think it's a very valid point.
Sure. Amit?
So from my perspective, one or two things. One is very clearly that we should really restructure our taxation system. I think we need to actually create a system wherein people are able to invest in enterprises. I think from my point of view, a very brashiest idea, when we are as individuals, we are taxed at 30%, I think what the government of India should do, you'll get taxed at 20%, rest or 10%, and further 20% you will have to necessarily invest in, say, startups. Push that. That is where Indian industry will actually start looking at. You have to create capital. You have to create that Indian money to really go into the system. I think you can instigate or let people get into investing into enterprises. And that is what entrepreneurship is going to be all about. Because from my point of view, the answer lies in entrepreneurship. The second thing is that we need to invest very strongly in our social institutions. Now, that is like health and education. We are severely lagging behind that. This pandemic has shown that what India needs to do. So we need to focus on health and education. It can have a huge positive long-term impact. And we have to do it on urgent basis, and especially education. We do need to do it now. We need to actually make sure that our learning outcomes improve very, very quickly. And India will really skyrocket. I think if we want to, if we dream of a very competitive India, very prosperous India, we have to work now on education. And then we can actually see a very prosperous country in about 20 years.
Yep. Dr. Vikas?
I think the best thing that the government should do is it should just stay out of business. I mean, just let the corporates be. And I think Indian spirit is very, very. I really, I don't know how to say this. I've been interacting with guiding MSMEs over the last 6-7 years. The kind of energy, the kind of idea that they have. If only the government let them be, I think we can do. But on a serious note, I think the government should look at a very holistic policy. I think the Prime Minister has been trying to do several things, but unfortunately, things at the ground level doesn't happen. And unless and until the policies are great when they're made, but if it's not implemented well, there's no use of those policies. So the government needs to implement well. The government needs to make sure that the policies that they make are consistent. Nobody likes changing tax rates every year. Nobody likes policy changes every quarter. And we have seen several organizations have suffered because of that. The third thing, I agree with Amit when he says that the government should invest in education and health. And when I'm saying education, I'm saying government should get out of higher education. There's no point in trying to subsidize higher education. The government should focus on subsidizing primary and secondary education. There's two. So I think that the Prime Minister means well. I think the government means well. I think he must put in a team which can implement it, every idea that he has, and it can be done. I have faith in the system. It's just that they need to shake it up a little bit more than what he has done till now.
Prabal, nobody better than you to answer this question. Will the next step come from the government or should it come from the corporates when it comes to competing with China?
Not China. I think I would answer the larger question of competitiveness. That is really what matters. China is just one factor in that. And like most of you said, especially Amit, Dr. Goel, Vikas, the time is now when we need to do it. And the only way, frankly, the few steps that the government can take, and this is a 2-minute answer to a much complex issue, but if I were to say the top 3 things which it can do or should do or try to do is, first is create an ecosystem by which we can attract large-scale capital investment into the country, both through domestic savings, of course, is there, plus global capital. And then focus them into areas where it will give manifold returns, not into leaky enterprises. And that is infrastructure and manufacturing. These are the 2 things we need to invest in. So this global capital needs to go in specifically into infrastructure building and manufacturing capability. That is one. The second is productivity growth through technology on one hand, and on the other hand, by reallocation of resources away from public sector units into more productive units. This is the second big thing. That's where most of our money goes out. And I can go on and on about PSU banks and stuff like that. But basically at a high level, productivity growth, when the money comes in, productivity growth, one through technology, and second through reallocation of resources into the non-PSU segment. And the third one, of course, is you can do all this only when you have innovation capability in the country. When the money comes in, and therefore through technology, and second through reallocation of resources. And therefore this innovation capability can come only through education. So education, higher education, and future growth areas are right here, and we can do well. Telecom, robotics, high-end automation, new energy vehicles. These are all new things. We can actually leapfrog them because we have the talent. But that ecosystem for innovation is just not there. As Amit mentioned, I'm from the IT industry for ages, I know, except for some companies like Intel, where I work now, or some other very specific IP-oriented companies. There's nothing which is IP-oriented in the country. So that ecosystem needs to be built. I think these are the three large, high-level things. It's a complex topic, but effectively, since you asked me, this is what I would say here.
Sure, Dr. Batra.
No, I think we should let Madhumita ji ask a question, and we should take some audience questions. Some of them are comments. Some, with some I don't agree. Rajiv Chuneja is saying why not quietly in a disciplined and a systematic manner without going to roads and burning the Chinese products that we paid for. We should build strategic substitution by becoming more competitive and better quality products. That's what the panelists are mostly saying. There are some questions. There's one question from Dr. Govind. And, again, you answered it in some way. Why it was COVID-19, an attack on our border that required us to take a positive action towards local manufacturing and other self-reliant measures. Why there was lack of strategic planning and thinking missing all these years. You should know that the Chinese imports have risen to more than 50 billion US dollars recently. And there's a similar question. And then the TV Sina is asking, do you think because of the backlash that the Chinese are facing, the Chinese economy will actually contract, then grow? The one, so these are the kind of questions that are coming. And also, what do you think China knows that all this is happening? I want to ask all of you experts, what do you think China is thinking? What do you think the Chinese leaders are thinking? They're not going to sit there and, let others take advantage. So what are they thinking? What do you think is going to be China's strategy? We can start with you, Dr. Sandeep Goyal.
My view is that the Chinese cannot be underestimated. I mean, we've seen them do a fabulous job over the last, 40 odd years in terms of rebuilding their economy and making it world class. So one is, don't underestimate them. Fact of the matter is that they have consciously and conscientiously built an economy which is today an economic and production superpower. Now, if we have to compete, all these conversations about what the government should do, whether the economy should be pumped with more money or with lesser money, have all been academic discussions we've had. It's not an academic discussion that started post-COVID. I mean, these discussions have been going on for a very long time. Fact of the matter is, we've not been able to convert them into meaningful action. I also sometimes, I know it's kind of contra to all that everybody has said on the panel. I am not always, very sure about all the money going into entrepreneurship. Our track record with, entrepreneurship is also reasonably mixed. We've had a few companies which have done well, but our track record with most of the stuff that we do, even in the realm of, startups, is pretty poor, because the point is that most of them are really not new ideas. We're just trying to blindly copy ideas from the West, then look for, somebody to fund us, and then hope that between a borrowed idea and borrowed money, we will have a successful, enterprise on hand. I think what China has done and has succeeded in doing is in creating a system which is based on actually indigenous and, home developed technologies, which they were not dependent on the rest of the world for. They have, for example, beaten Silicon Valley almost blow by blow on everything that they have created over the last 20 years. So the inputs, both in terms of, intellectual and cerebral thinking, as well as innovation, has to also start at a very, very basic level. So I blindly don't support this business of, we should put, 10-20% of our taxation should go to support startups. Why? First and foremost, the startup guy ought to have an innovative enough idea which can stand the test of both the marketplace and the economy. I mean, I worked with many startups and with large clients over the years, and I can tell you, 9 out of 10 guys are just blindly copying some idea from somewhere. They've gone, looked up the net, seen, how it's made some money somewhere. Now they're looking for somebody else's money to put into somebody else's idea, and then say, no, this is going to be the final success. I fundamentally disagree with that kind of thinking.
Very true. Absolutely.
So, Prabal, what do you think the Chinese are thinking, and what do you think they'll do over the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, thinking that the US is going to go after them economically and militarily, thinking the European nations may shift their supply chain from China to other parts, maybe not all of it India, but to Vietnam, to Philippines, to other places. What do you think the Chinese are thinking?
Anurag, I don't know what Chinese are thinking. No one knows. And let me tell you, I'll give you a couple of data points. I think that will be enough to give an indication of what I'm talking about. See, Chinese place a huge, this is very I think this has not been spoken about in the Indian media at all till today. And maybe I'll write for you on this, maybe at some point. It's something we need to understand about China when answering this question of what they're thinking. Do any of us know that the bottom 50% of China, of the Chinese population in the last 30 years, since these Deng Xiaoping reforms, have had the best standard of living in the last 3,000 years of history. Researched in US, in London, where I studied for this particular program, in Singapore, it's available. In the last 30 years, this is what they've delivered. So let's not, say that what the Communist Party of China is doing is wrong or anything. They're people, they have done this for the first time in 3,000-year history. And believe me, and in this period of time in the US, in the same 30 years, the standard of living of the bottom 50% has actually gone down significantly. In India, it has been so little bit better, but it's not reached the bottom of the pyramid. That is one. The core reason for this is the Communist Party of China is the exact opposite of the Russian Communist Party. They are Communist Party by name. It is not a democracy versus communist argument. This is the ideological reflex I'm giving you, but this is a fact. We should eliminate ideological bias. It is not an issue of democracy versus communism, because the Communist Party of China, by lens today, is the world's most meritocratic political party in the world. Just see the people who are running it and see their qualifications. Two of them have studied with me in their schools, in London Business School, in the Sloan program. They actually send people at every stage to educate themselves, study, and bring them back into government. So therefore, their brilliance, the brilliance of the people who run it, just the top echelons of the Communist Party, is brilliant. So therefore, what they are thinking, I don't know at the moment, but obviously it will be a tough challenge for any of us. They won't let it go just on its own. So they spend a lot on these two things, and they spend a lot on fighting the next war. And the next war is not in defense budgets. You can just look at it. Their defense budget is going up at a fixed percentage of the GNP, a very small fixed percentage. Whereas in US, it is going up in multiples of that. So they're playing the same game what US played with Russia to bring Russia down. Because everybody knows the next war is not going to be on defense. It will not be. It will be on technology. It will be through technology, through cyber security, through cyber warfare.
Cyber will be their biggest asset.
Yes. And that is where they're investing on. So there, the technological ecosystem is they're building is huge because of the brilliance of such people in various factors. So this is the reality. So what they're thinking is very difficult to say. I don't know that answer offhand. This is the way they think long term. So therefore, Anurag, someday if we can, we should think about all these aspects of China, which nobody in the Indian media talks about because we're very inward focused. Let me tell you that. We're very inward focused. Learn from that also. Learn from everyone and including them.
Correct.
how they have done in the last 40 years. See their ministers, see their people who are in the second level. This guy called Yang Shang, you must have heard of him. I mean, he's one of the most brilliant persons in the scientific world. And he's effectively like one of our ministers. Everyone is like that. So where are we? I mean, we are nowhere in that picture. I mean, so I don't want to get into that discussion, but there are fundamental ways in which post Deng Xiaoping, they have actually maintained the quality of what they did. And of course, the stability of policies and all of that we know.
So, I would like to bring in Madhumita ji.
And Mohan, I want to ask you this question. You've been saying Indian content, Indian. If, let's say, Dangal was produced in India, it was made in India, but it made most of its money in China. Do you think that the Indian producers, actors, are those so patriotic that they'll forego the Chinese territory now? We will not give our movies to China. I mean, do you think all this is possible? One way to look at it is we are...
No. Let me answer this. Any product, cinematic that you sell in China, the money doesn't come back to you. It stays in China. American products and Indian products. So nothing is coming. You are getting a fixed price. You don't get a share of the profit. You don't get the box office revenues. It's a waste of time. Let's not go there. I just want to bring 2 points which Mr. Roy said. Indian brain is now a worldwide phenomena. We create the best brains on planet Earth. There are $4 trillion companies on Earth. 2 of them, the CEOs are Indians. They could have been Brazilians, they could have been Chinese, they could have been British. They chose Indians. The kids that are going to school today, they are going to rule the world tomorrow. We are a meritorious country as far as that goes. These people don't stay at home is a problem. China makes sure that they have those people back at home. They basically copied Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore model of making a society which is within their control, yet competitive globally.
Very true.
That is the model that they have copied. And that's the model that India missed out. Lee Kuan Yew actually copied the Indian model. The Air India business plan is the same as Singapore Airline business plan. The British Indian Civil Service is the Singapore Indian Service. The Tata Administrative Service was a version of the Indian Civil Service. We have to go back to the basics, find out where we missed out, where we went wrong, and we will be okay. China, in its current form, with its internal trouble, will not, mark my words, have the same economy 10 years from now. They will be in trouble. You can't keep 1.3 billion people down all the time. Nobody has been able to do that.
Sure.
Irrespective of the Communist Party, irrespective of what they plan.
Sure. Agreed.
Okay.
That's a fair point.
In fact, there was a Chinese CEO of Shanghai Electric working in India. And then he was also the CEO of Fosun Capital. Fosun is a large family group owned. And he wrote this book, I think 5 or 6 years back. He worked in India for 10, 12 years. And he wrote this book, What Can China Learn from India? In fact, that's what I was trying to Google. And it'd be interesting to get him on one hour. But when we talk to Chinese CEOs working in India or Indian executives of Chinese companies, they feel they're in uncharted territory. And they feel that this could get worse before it gets better, so to say. Right? So there is that sense of hostility towards Chinese interests in India, if I may say, whether it's temporary or it is long term or whether it is institutional and patronized at the country level or whether it is only individual. Time will tell.
Trust deficit.
Dr. Kapoor, you want to make a point?
There is trust deficit.
Dr. Kapoor.
Yeah. So Anurag, I think
you do interact with Chinese companies, right?
I do. In fact, I'll not share further details on this, but then very interesting. But then if you really look at it, I think when you say that the Indian mind is there or whatever, let's accept it. Yeah, 1/5 of the population of the world is Indians. So if somebody goes to the top of the heap is actually because of excellence that he actually achieves. I somehow feel that we should not really get into that lofty thing or we were great in the past or whatever. We need to say that what we can do now and look at the future. talking about that whole cultural, it's like corporate imperialism, cultural imperialism view. Stop that. Say what we are today and focus on the future rather than getting or living in the past and get embedded in the past and things. Move for the future, and that is what the world is going to be about. Lofty claims can be exciting, but they can actually be very naive.
Very true.
Yes, Dr. Vikas, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to answer what Dr. Batra was saying, what is the Chinese thinking? I don't know what they're thinking. And I think instead of focusing on what they're thinking, I think we must focus on what we should do, because that's something that we can control. Yes. The government must, I think this COVID and what is happening at the border is, I think, a wake-up call. The government must make sure, and not only the government, I think the whole ecosystem must be aware that unless we wake up and do something seriously, I think we're going to have a very, very bleak future. We still have close to about 30% of Indians who still don't get 2 meals a day. I think we can talk about all the romantic things that some of us have been talking about. We can talk about two of our, Indians are leading the world's largest organizations. They are leading the organization despite the system. They went to the US, they studied there, they worked there, and they did it. It's not claiming that these guys are Indians and they're leading the world is only trying to fool ourselves.
Means nothing.
Having said that, I think the government needs to do a lot more. The government needs to be very, very pragmatic about what it can do and what it can achieve. We don't have to be the best manufacturing economy in the world. We are very good at services. Why don't we focus on services? Why do we need to get into areas where we are not going to make it at least for the next 10 years? Let's build our capabilities as Chinese did from the 1970s or 1980s. They waited, they waited, they waited. They invested, they invested, and they invested. And when they were ready, they launched it. Let's work towards that. Make sure that we are ready, we are competitive, and then focus on Make in India. Until and unless that, let's identify where we are good at, support the ecosystem, build the bridges that is needed, and ensure that we are competitive in doing what we do. I think this whole idea of, China is going to go away in 10 years time because, culturally we are strong. I think it sounds good. It makes me happy to know that some of us are thinking that, but we need to be pragmatic. We need to be on the ground. We need to realize that time is running out for us. Just to give you a statistic, our organization did a study about covering 12 states. The difference between the GDP growth of 1% means if we don't grow at 7%, we are going to, the one generation is going to be lost away. For a generation is 30 years. And for us, unless we are able to double the income in 10 years time, that generation is lost. We have lost close to about 2 generations in the last 60 years. Unless and until we focus on making sure that the people who are deprived, those people who are on the ground, unless we are able to find happiness, find some, I don't know how to say that, but they need to get bread. They are waiting in the line. They are waiting outside the inclusive purview. Focusing on taking on China, boycotting their product is going to, as I said earlier, is like cutting your nose to spite the face. We can't do it. We can't do it. We should not do it, because it's going to make our economy less. It's going to make our economy less competitive, and we are going to suffer much more than China is going to suffer.
Touche. So we are running out of time. So I'd like to invite Madhumita ji for the question. Madhumita ji.
Well, my question is broadly a lead off from the earlier. First of all, I would like to say that leading off from what Mr. Basu has said, that yes, the fact that we are a democracy and the fact that China has a one-party rule cuts both ways. Because in India, being a democracy, we cannot necessarily implement all that China does. Because China is able to push through its policies with much less opposition than any Indian government can. And of course, there are many examples, but it's not worthwhile going into that. But the thought that came to my mind when I was asked when this whole idea was given to me about overpowering China, what I find that yes, we are in terms of economic growth not quite close to China, and it will take us many long years. But some things have happened in the recent past, and those things that have happened, I mentioned COVID and the fact that the whole world is closed, and then the aggression that the Chinese aggression in Galwan, the Chinese action they have taken in Hong Kong, they have considerably dented China's soft power. And the way India has tackled COVID has, from my perception as an Indian, it has only enhanced India's soft power. Yes, maybe China has an advantage over us in many years, but India's advantage as soft power continues, and maybe India possibly. I mean, I would like the panelists to come in, and maybe this is what India should build on more and more. Uh, the whole fact that we do enjoy far more trust in the world, that India is seen as a far more tolerant country in the world. Maybe these are the weapons we can actually use to build relations with the world, and what we will see in the near future is an entirely different world. I think all the commercial equations will shortly change, and I hope the panelists will come in and share their views. I do think that the economic equations will change, the diplomatic equations will change as we go forward.
Sure, that precisely. Dr. Batsa, we short of time. Do you have any questions from the audience, or like should we sum it up? Dr. Batsa, can you hear me?
Abhinav, I don't think he is there.
Okay, he's there.
So,
okay.
And
okay. So,
4 o'clock, we need to stop here. Right?
Sure. So this was really insightful. Thank you to all the panelists. What we have learned is essentially that this was a holistic approach episode towards handling the China crisis. We'll be coming out with more webinars and episodes in the future, precisely targeted, addressing each problem, maybe land and labor laws in one, maybe emerging technologies in one, maybe digital banking system going forward. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you, Madhumita ji. This was really insightful. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.